Welcome to the Saturday Night Live Afterparty. This week, we'll be discussing Season 46, Episode 6 of SNL with host Dave Chappelle and musical guest Foo Fighters. I'm Catherine Coleman, and I'm joined this week by unaffected Canadian bystanders Steve Finn and John Murray. If you'd like to connect with any of us, you can do so at snlpodcast.com. All right, here we go. Whew, so we had quite a long week in America. Everybody glued to CNN, waiting for the election results just for it to be called 12 hours before SNL showtime, which then, of course, created a snowball of anticipation of what were they going to say, what were they going to do. They only have so much time. So this was definitely set up to be probably easily the most watched episode in a few years. So I'm really excited to see if we all think it lived up to the hype.
Yeah, it's a rare occurrence when SNL gets to be one of the first entertainment venues to bite into a news cycle. Normally they get sort of the hollowed out carcass of the week's events. So it is nice that this is the show this week that a lot of people said, well, I'm going to stay up. You know, I need a take on this. I need to connect with the world at large and just, get a sense of how everyone's feeling. So yeah, SNL, they get to be the first ones out of the gate. And I think it certainly made for a discussion worthy show.
For sure. And we're going to get into a full review in our rundown. But before we do, I think we got some patron stuff to talk about.
Yeah, we definitely have one new patron that I want to give a shout out to, and it's Jamin K of the Talking About the News in a Satirical Fashion YouTube channel by way of Philadelphia, PA. We batted around some of Jamin's feedback a couple weeks ago about making changes to the show after it's aired and kind of the pros and cons of that approach. And I guess he was so appreciative that he thought maybe he'd kick in a couple bucks and check out our Patreon. And we are very happy that he's come on board. And so we thank him for joining us. And we hope that anyone else that would like to get our full unabridged coverage and would either like the full audio podcast or the video podcast, they're both found exclusively on Patreon and Subscribestar. And we would love anyone to come check us out there. And with that, why don't I just keep rolling here, Catherine, because we got a little bit of feedback that I want to bat around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, longtime friend of the show, Monette Marady, was on Twitter today, espousing some very radical views about the show. And so I had to get into a bit of a Twitter beef with her. When all was said and done and the dust had cleared, she asked a question that I think is probably worth batting around. I think this is the week to do it because whenever SNL comes back from their hiatus, they may have some decisions to make about casting and who's going to be playing political roles or whether they're going to carry impressions forward. So I wanted to basically weigh in right now and just kind of assess the landscape and what we'd like SNL to do with their impressions. So I'm just going to read a little bit of Monette's feedback here. So she says, I remain adamant that Carrie Rudolph are election impressions that should be retired. Harness the dynamic energy of Moffat ego into the political POTUS VP impression. So she's basically saying in her perfect world, we'll consider Maya Rudolph and Jim Carrey a relic of the election season hype that the show always does every 4 years, and that they will transition out and they will bring in two cast members to take over those roles. In this case, heavyweight cast members, Ego Wodum for Kamala and Alex Moffat for Biden. So that's her 2 cents on it. Why don't we just pull back a little bit? And first off, let's decide, do we want Carrie and Rudolph to stay in the roles potentially for the next 4 years? Or would we like to see it transition to some cast member?
I don't know. I think I definitely want Maya Rudolph to stick around. I think she is Kamala Harris. And I don't think anybody else at this point could live up to it for me. So I'm a fan of at least Maya sticking around for 4 years, and I'm totally cool with that. Carrie, I've had some mixed feelings on this week. I actually thought he was starting to come into it. We'll get into that a little bit more when we get to the cold open, but I'm liking him a little more now, but I wouldn't be sad to see him go. But that said, I kind of feel like the ideal time to do that might actually be in like an inauguration sketch in January. So they
Okay.
could do it now, but I kind of feel like there's a few more months of it's not technically election, but it's still not like
Sure.
the official term, you know? So I think we have a couple more months to maybe think about it and bat it around and really decide how we're feeling about Kerry's Biden as we continue through the rest of this year.
Okay. So you're drawing a hard line on Kamala and you're punting on
Yes.
Biden. Very
Yeah.
good. All right, Steve, what do you got?
Well, I'm open to the idea of keeping Jim Carrey and Maya Rudolph on. I don't think it's a terrible idea. You could make an argument that there was a full arc that was carried out that ends with this episode.
Mhm.
They really, you know, it feels like a spot where they could put a pin in it and pivot from there. And if what I'm hearing on the internet is true and Alec Baldwin has retired from doing Trump, then this would be the time to
Sure.
just wipe it clean. And I don't hate that idea of Ego and Alex doing it. So whatever happens, I'm not going to be disappointed because I
Sure.
really have no strong feelings.
Okay. Uh as far as Kamala's concerned, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Catherine. Now that we've seen Maya do it, everything else is going to pale in comparison. It
Mhm.
would be like transitioning the Sarah Palin away from Tina Fey. Like at a
Right.
certain point, it becomes the iconic impression. And I feel like Maya's so dialed in on it that you're
Mhm.
not going to do better. And the nice thing about having an alum in that role is that if the administration goes on for 2 terms or she becomes president in 4 years or whatever it is, Kamala is early enough in her career that she's going to be around for a while, and players on the show will come and go, and you can kind of sidestep any more awkward transitions as players reach their tenure
Mhm.
and branch out and do other things or become unavailable. So it's honestly a little bit more of a safer bet to keep it with Maya Rudolph in a way. As
Yeah,
far as
that's a
Joe
really good
Biden,
point.
yeah, because I feel like the Kamala impression is more iconic and something that I think they should double down on and keep in the long run. It makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out what to do with Biden because it becomes almost like the show is acknowledging that maybe the Jim Carrey thing isn't working as well as they would have liked if they part ways with him but keep Maya Rudolph.
True.
That said, you can always get out in front of that and do a little PR and say, well, yeah, Jim just wanted to come in up into the election and do his part for the team or whatever. And he thinks, go out on a high note or whatever. Like there's ways to mitigate that and do it
Mhm.
elegantly. So it's not impossible, but it would kind of leave people wondering a little bit because he wasn't as embraced in the role as some people have. Um, but I personally think that they should find a way to exit him, whether it is in a couple weeks whenever the show comes back and they have something to say about Biden, or like you said, during the inauguration. That's always a great time to do a handoff because it feels like the whole country is doing a handoff.
Right.
There's ways to do it. I think they should. I like Jim Carrey. I liked the idea of Jim Carrey getting in the mix and us getting a sense of the Jim Carrey SNL experience. But there's two sides to this because it isn't just about whether we keep the current cameos. If it was to transition to cast members, who should take it on? Steve, let's start with you. Who do you think would be the best fit for Kamala and Biden?
Well, I like the idea that the person who wrote in suggested with Alex and Ego. If I were to think of anyone else, I could see Beck doing a good job as Biden.
Hmm.
And with the amount of Republican uh, figures that he filled out and people related to it, like without Trump, we'll probably see a lot less Putin. We'll definitely see a lot less Pence. So a lot of the political roles that Beck has been doing probably won't be needed nearly as much, if at all. So if we wanted to see Beck in that setting, maybe that would be a way to do it. And I can see him pulling it off.
Hmm.
As for Harris, that one's tough. I would say Ego's probably the best one to go with it. She does have that, that professional demeanor and
Right.
She could carry herself in the way needed. And yeah, she could put a little sass on it as well and make it her own. So I see that working out for sure. But
Very good.
like I said, I'm open to seeing Jim and and Maya stay there. So I'm just happy with whatever happens.
Very good. All right, Catherine, what do you got?
I'm gonna agree with Steve and Monette. I think Alex and Ego would be the best suited. Alex in particular, I could very easily see doing a great job with Biden. It's hard for me to imagine anyone else as Kamala. Now that we've
Mhm.
had Maya, which was kind of what I was getting at. But I do think Ego is the best suited on the cast right now to take that on. I think she has, in a way, sort of a similar spirit as the current take on Kamala. Sort of, a little bit of sass gone in there, and I think Ego would do a great job with that.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I'm just gonna ditto Steve and Monette.
Sure. My only hesitation about, say, a Beck or one of the senior players is you kind of got to double down on someone that you know is going to be there for the next 4 years, if at all possible. Um, so I kind of think that takes Beck or Kyle or some of the more tenured people out of the running. Alex and Mikey are kind of right in the middle of their contracts. I think Mikey might actually be a better fit because with Biden, I don't know if it's subtlety or charm or suave sophistication or um, a really dialed in physicality that you need for that character, which is everything that Alex Moffat brings to the table. And he what he does very brilliantly. But he's more of a leading man, just a kill you with a look kind of a guy, whereas Mikey Day, I think, can be kind of more of a bumbler. And I kind of see Biden more in the Gerald Ford kind of vein of SNL presidential parody. I see them being gentle with him and kind of focusing on just kind of his doddering nature and the trailing off of thoughts and the kind of stumbling around a little bit. Just he's really, really old. So that's kind of the most obvious and easy thing that they could poke fun at. So I see that kind of being more of where they would go with the impression if they moved it on to another player. And I could see Mikey Day handling that just fine. So I think pretty much anyone could do it because my feeling on SNL's politics in general is that um, there's a lot more spectacle than substance to it. Like I don't think they're saying anything like so amazing that there's only one person that could do it. I feel like the players in a way are a little bit of just stand-ins for the run through of the week's news kind of a thing. And so I don't think it's as high stakes as maybe people think it is in some ways. But I think I could see Mikey in the role, but I'm totally fine seeing Carrie and Kamala stick with it if that's where the show wants to go. Like I'm not going to lose sleep over that, even though I think Carrie he stands out so much as Biden that I really have trouble seeing Biden shine through. It's
Mhm.
it's always Jim Carrey and his silly grin. So I'm okay with it, but I just don't think that I'm ever going to just be engrossed by their current take. But I don't know. Would we get anything better with a player? I don't know. So a lot of questions. I'm excited though to see what the show comes up with because they've obviously been mulling this over. They're a couple steps ahead when it comes to these sort
No,
of
they
things.
hadn't
And
thought about it at all.
no, yeah, it hasn't even come up. So I'm sure they've got a game plan or they have a short list of options. And one way or another, I have a feeling by January, it'll be settled, whether without a word and things just carry on status quo or something happens by early 2021. We should have an answer. So why don't we jump into our show? I'll hand it back to Catherine.
All right, let's get into it. People don't just want to see Biden and Kamala happy, they also want to see Trump sad. So we hear from both camps on this historic night with cameos from Jim Carrey, Maya Rudolph, and Alec Baldwin. So, Steve, how'd you feel about this cold open?
It was enjoyable and more or less what I expected. It was pretty impressive to see them scramble to recreate things that happened 4 hours in the past.
Right.
So, getting certain outfits right, like Kamala's white blazer, her whole
With the
getup.
scarf, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant stuff from the wardrobe department. And I like that they acknowledge the real hero of the whole election process was the touchscreen guys. And yeah,
Yes.
the stumps was a brilliant joke for sure. I thought it was great, and the way they ended it was probably my favorite part. Not exactly the end, but how they ended with Trump and the whole song. It was making fun of him. It was making fun of SNL. They were kind of poking at themselves with that. So I had a lot of fun with this. Absolutely. And as far as cold opens go for this season, this is up there with some of the more fun ones, I'd say.
I agree. I was having a great time. I think they probably had a cold open planned with, is it John King, the map guy, and Wolf Blitzer. And I think that was what they were going with. And then Saturday threw him a curveball. But I think it was a great choice to leave them in there for just a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Because so much of the country was watching CNN, and that was something that we were all so tuned in on. It would have been a huge missed opportunity to scrap that altogether. So I was really thrilled to see that they kept it in for just the little bit that we did get there. For the rest of it, the Trump stuff is a little bit more inspired than the Biden stuff, as we've discussed. There's just more to say with him. That's that.
What are we
And
going to do
then-
without Trump?
Fair. Now we can say it.
Yeah.
But this was the cold open where I started to fall in love with Carrie's Biden just a little bit. It's hard to tell if they were doing something better or if just the mood of the day was carrying me. Me and my friend said we were 5 bottles of champagne deep. We were having a good time. The mood was up. It's hard to tell if there was much they could have done wrong, but I was really, really enjoying this. And I thought Carrie was really coming into it, and they let him do, the whole loser thing that was really fun. So yeah, feeling good on this cold open for me. John, how about you?
I agree that this is right up there for their political stuff for the year. Just because they had something that they actually wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You get the feeling with some of the other cold opens that it's a bit of a slog. They know they have to cover the event of the week. It's already laid out for them, but that doesn't mean that it generates the funnest material to perform, or like they're trying
Right.
to do their best with what they've got to work with for the week, but it isn't always something your heart's in. And I think I was feeling a little bit of that. Not that Jim Carrey wasn't bringing his best to it, and Maya wasn't bringing her best to it, but it was just so obvious that there was so little to say in some of those cold opens.
Right.
Whereas this feels like it writes itself, like a gloating victory speech contrasted with the most non concession speech in history. Like, of course, you're going to find comedy in a premise like that. So obviously they were able to take this to some fun places. I think this was the perfect use of Trump, and Alec performed it very well. Like you have to find the pathos in taking a disco song and pulling all that emotion out of it. And like I just feel like Alec Baldwin, the performer, shone through there. Like,
yeah,
he is good, like he has timing and he has, like there's something special that he can do when he's got something juicy to work with. And
there's a reason they've kept him around.
Yeah. And so him doing Macho Man in that, somber way was just beautiful. Like that was an inspired moment. A little bit of gloating, a little bit of, nerdy Biden dancing. That's all fun. I so wanted to like the her, but my biggest problem with Biden is that it's Jim Carrey. It's not Biden, it's Jim Carrey. So for them to indulge that even more,
right?
It just felt so easy. It felt, it was a give the people what they want moment. And for anyone that just wanted that little bit of catharsis and wanted to just kind of, take a victory lap with Jim Carrey, great. I wouldn't fault anyone for really being into it. But I felt like that was such a corny thing to throw in personally. But
some may argue that was the whole point.
Oh yeah, that could have been it. Like, they talked about Jim Carrey saying he had a serious take for Biden. It could have just been keep me in the game until election day so I can say
yeah.
Her. That could have been it.
Past him.
This could have been a joke, 2 months in the making. That could be what we're looking at. For me personally, I didn't need it, but overall, I thought they went to some fun places with this. I thought it was a good cold open, and it wasn't too long, all things considered.
Yeah.
I think this
It
was
was
just
8
about right.
minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was solid. So so far so good.
All right. Coming into the episode on a high note, let's get into the monologue where Dave Chappelle gives America that post-election truth plus comedy that we all expected. Steve, what won about this? What'd you like?
Well, this is a monologue that pretty much takes us all the way to the halfway point of the show.
Yes.
And I'm not complaining.
Longest monologue ever, I believe. I
Really?
think
15 minutes.
Yeah, I think it clocked in right around 16 minutes, which I think is a record. Yeah.
Okay. I figured it would have been Don Rickles or something who had the record.
He's up in the top 5 for sure, but I think this one took it.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Dave Chappelle's known for going on a long time. I'm sure you've heard of his 3 to 6 hour shows he's done.
In cornfields, yes.
In cornfields, yeah. Now, I wasn't even sure if he was going to even get to jokes because, he started very serious. He ended very serious. And, he is such a talented public speaker. Apart from being, a fantastic comedian, he can captivate an audience with a story, even when there are no attempted jokes or laughs to be had. This was a very interesting kind of reflection on his family and what it might mean to him today. It was all very nice stuff. And, the brilliant mind that he is, he turns that funny on somewhere between 2 words halfway through a sentence. And all of a sudden we're in a comedy show and it's bam, just like that. That is a talent I don't know you could teach. It's such an amazing ability to turn on a dime like that.
Oh, well, it was a good monologue for sure. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in here with the locking those murderous whites up, wearing your Klan masks, Trump guessing the cure. Tons of great material here, and Dave, layering in the truth and the comedy. That's why they booked him for this show. That's why he's here, because we weren't sure what the mood was going to be, and we knew that he would be able to tackle it regardless. I thought there was some stuff he was clearly trying out that I think didn't land at all. And it's a 16 minute monologue, so there's room to cut some stuff out. So I thought that was sort of interesting. Who knows how that played at dress though? So, maybe he was genuinely surprised that it didn't land on the live show. But overall, huge win on the monologue. John, are you going to come in unanimous on that?
Yeah, I'm not going to be, the one guy in the Western Hemisphere to claim that Dave Chappelle is not maybe the greatest living comedian of our generation. Right. I don't think the room was on fire. About halfway through, it seemed like he was getting laughs from the people that were dialed in and keeping pace, but it felt like the room cooled off on him, and he obviously picked up on that because he made a few quips. Lauren, I thought we were doing a comedy show here. Like, is this the audience you gave me, kind of a thing? So I'm gonna blame the room because I think if they were feeding back a little bit better, he probably would have been able to put those over. I think that for some reason they just weren't in sync. We'd speculated about maybe audience fatigue. We don't really know where they're pulling the audience from week over week at this point. So there's a lot of things that could have been playing into that. And just the fact that you've got half as many people in the space.
Right.
So, there's a lot of things that could have made it an inhospitable room for him. But that said, I mean, he flowed through it like a champ, right? Like there's nothing about what he was doing that was anything less than just the most, polished, precise, perfectly articulated comedy. Like what he does is very calculated because you need to have a real mastery over how you deliver those lines and how you craft those lines and just how hard you work to commit those lines to memory so that they flow out of you in a way where the joke kind of just lives in the delivery so much. Cause a lot of it isn't really hard punchlines like he does. Cause he cuts you a look and he lets you know when he's hit it, when he's proud of himself. But a lot of it is just so much in just his charisma and just how he flows on stage. My only thought on first watch was I was kind of expecting something a little bit more inclusive and jubilant and uh, optimistic about the future and unifying in a way. And
Mhm.
then on second watch, I'm like, wait a minute. Well, that's not Chappelle. That's never been Chappelle. Like, why would I put that on him to somehow deliver the monologue that I'm assuming the nation needs? Like, why am I imposing that kind of, pressure or expectation on him
But I
when
do think he ultimately sort of wrapped back around to that.
he did, but there was a whole lot of let's get
Yes.
Whitey in there too. Like
Right, yeah.
Chappelle didn't shy away from doing what Chappelle does. And
Right.
I'm not saying that there isn't truth to it and that it isn't something worth hearing. Like there was just a lot that I think he genuinely believes that he's passionate about. And I think
Mhm.
everything that he delivered, the points he tried to make, I think he made them masterfully. I was just kind of surprised. And on second watch, I'm like, well, okay, I get it. The show can't impose an agenda on him, even if they wanted to. And Chappelle could care less about the state of the world and somehow tempering his message to line up with what's going to be most comfortable for his audience. Like that shouldn't be part of his thinking. So the fact that I went there is just maybe me imposing the craziness of the week
Mhm.
on Chappelle. And once I let go of that and just said, well, is this guy still on top? Absolutely. Chappelle's on top.
Right.
So that's all I have to say about that.
Overall, big wins on the monologues. We're coming into this first sketch feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, the Allstate guy, and Count Chocula all lose their jobs due to the strained social climate of 2020. With cameos from Maya Rudolph and Alec Baldwin out of the cold open. So, Steve, what'd you like about this one?
Well, I like that it felt like rented space. Kind of like, when Robert Smigel would throw a cartoon in there and Lauren would chase after his show and say, come back here. This felt like they just, rented out some airtime to the Chappelle show. And sure, it was shot multi-camera and it, was done how we usually see the sketches on SNL. The material was very, very Chappelle, almost to the point where like it kind of changed the whole feel of SNL for a minute. Like obviously the monologue, we're used to a monologue and we're used to having it be different based on the comedian. But the way that he introduces the sketch and some of
Mhm.
those jokes, like when Aunt Jemima starts talking about her breast milk, it all just feels very Dave Chappelle to me. So yeah, this just felt like a little bit of a different show to start off the night.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This was super fun, a super interesting take. We have these characters getting fired. What if they were real people we could put in a room? I think that's a super fun place to start, and they went great places with it. So they were heightening it with the different characters, right? We had Aunt Jemima, then Uncle Ben, and then wait, the Allstate guy's controversial, and Count Chocula. You know, super fun stuff. I was really enjoying it. I see what they were doing with Chappelle setting it up. It was kind of a throwback to the Chappelle show, and it allowed that first sting of I'm Aunt Jemima to really hit. But
You
I
stole my
will say,
comment.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was a little taken out of it, or a little taken aback when we came back from the commercial, and I was like, wait,
You
the
still there?
monologue's not over?
Yes, right.
Is this gonna be the whole
Yeah.
show? What? No, we had 15 minutes. Give me some sketches. So that sent me into a very brief tailspin, and then I saw what they were doing, and it was fine. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I thought this was pretty inspired stuff and very appropriate for Chappelle, like you said, Steve. So, John, did you have a secondary comment that I didn't steal?
No, but I'm gonna make mine anyways. The brilliance in this is because Chappelle set it up, he got all the exposition out of the way, but he leaves you
Mhm.
hanging because he doesn't reveal anything, but he tells you exactly what the scene is about. So that one line into it, Maya Rudolph
Right.
can turn to camera and go,
But I'm Aunt Jemima.
and that just like as the very first little sting of the sketch,
Mhm.
it really just put me in it. Like it just really made me invest because I don't know. It's just a fun way to come out of the gate and not have to learn the world or understand the
Mhm.
scene or get up to speed or go through a whole bunch of exposition to set up what the jokes will be a minute or two down the road. Just right out of the gate, we're having fun with it. And we all understand because we all heard, the ridiculous headlines about how problematic these food labels are now. So yes, timely, well crafted, well delivered. Maya Rudolph, we've said it. She always seems to just take whatever they give her and knock it out of the park. And
Mhm.
it's the goofy stuff that you want up top to just put you in a good mood. And I felt it definitely served its purpose that way.
I did
Definitely.
appreciate the fourth wall break to talk about Pete Davidson's
Sure.
lips.
Right. I was
Right,
about to say
'cause-
we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on that.
America. Look at Pete Davidson's lips.
Right. Yeah. Chappelle, he always makes it very clear when he hosts that nobody's got reins on him, right? Like he's going to stay in a sketch as long as he wants to. He's going to break when he wants to. He's going to say the jokes he wants during his monologue. Yeah, he makes it clear that he's there on his terms. And there's something kind of fun about seeing a host that just says, I don't need this, right? Like I've already won. So I'm here because it's fun for me and I'm just going to do it my way.
All right, well, let's keep going. Do you remember the day that Super Mario came out? Jake does, because it's the day his nuts popped. So, Steve, what'd you like about this one?
I loved just how willing they were to let this all fall apart completely. Like, first of all, the whole background of talking about Mario, it has no relation to, losing your genitalia. There's no logical
Are you
connection
sure?
between the two. There's no organic way of coming up with this premise. It's like, hey, you know how there's Mario? Well, let's do a sketch about, losing your balls. Like there's no way to get there from there unless, you really want to make something random and hilarious. But what I really like about this is that, once they start talking about that, nobody else in the documentary can talk about Mario at all. Like this documentary doesn't work at all because of this. And I just loved how disarmed everybody became from the shocking nature of all the reveals from Kyle and
Mhm.
Mikey. So yeah, that was quite the ride. I was enjoying it.
Yeah, the reactions in this were great. And then Keenan being the audible voice to those reactions, narrating what those were, really sealed it in that
Mhm.
this was great and this was really fun and a great way to use them. The one thing that I would have liked to see that I think could have brought it up to kind of the next level is some more sort of visual gags. So we had Kyle laying on the toilet, but it would have been really fun to see, maybe Kyle, like a vintage photo of Kyle in the hospital bed with Mikey and they're holding a Nintendo controller, just like some little visual things to add in just to vary up those beats just a little bit. I
Mhm.
think could have been a really great layer to add in, but this was great stuff. It didn't need that. It just would have been a fun thing to add. So, John, what did you think?
I ditto all that. This was fun. Um, Not a lot to build on. The reactions obviously sold it in a lot of ways. Just, at some point they cut to Bowen and he doesn't even say anything. It's just his stunned look and they just cut
Right.
away almost immediately. And, just that is what helps you to just really feel the awkwardness of everyone in that situation. You live through those other people. It's a lot of fun that way. The way that they set it up as a commercial, so that you do get all those quick cuts and you just get to heap more coals on Kyle back and forth, kind of in rapid style. It worked.
Shave him down.
Yeah, shave him. And the writing was competent in that they kept finding more ways to, just add more awkwardness to his story. It isn't just the initial accident, it's the ensuing surgery and then the infection that, finally turned him into a Ken doll and just on and on. So yeah, just as one of those hanging a guy out to dry, heaping coals on him kind of sketches, the way that they edited this all together really made it snappy. And I think that really helped the humor. So that's all I got on that. Just fun, goofy fun. And all the little Mario music cues were just warming my heart too, because as many kids of my generation, I was a Mario addict. Still am. Played some Mario this morning with my kids.
Nice.
I love that. How wholesome.
Very much.
Well, let's keep going. We're still feeling pretty hot on this episode. And now we're into a pre-tape where Keith begs Sarah to take him back. 'Cause he's changed, baby. So, Steve, what won about this?
Oh, I just loved watching Beck make it all worse. Like, he probably would have been better off if he just didn't show up to make his impassioned speech. uh, but it that was the point, obviously. Like, they hit all those
Right.
beats to really hearken the genre of the romantic comedy, I guess. And yeah, just where it went and all the reveals and just the sheer fact that Ego was still kind of like half sold on this the whole time, as they would be in the movie without all this ridiculous
Right.
stuff being revealed. Like, that was all just so funny to me because, if you actually look at it with an analytical eye, these characters would not make the decisions that they're making. But that's, what makes it so funny.
Absolutely. This was fantastic. I love seeing Beck in these dramatic romantic roles. He just nails it. He sells it so well. But what was even more working with this was how brilliantly written it was.
Mhm.
They were piling on and on and on and on, but it never started to feel contrived. Like,
No.
all of those transitions in the conversation continued to feel pretty natural. Obviously there are things that no one would ever say, but it was a really smoothly written scene.
Yes.
And I just really, really respect that they were able to do that, because that's not easy.
Mhm.
And then those jokes just kept landing too. So, like, I loved it every time they would subvert our expectations and just take us on a new turn. So, I'm really into porn, doing 2 to 3 scenes, never with women. At every chance, there's a new turn it's taking. And man, I was having fun with this. Just a really, really well written sketch.
Yeah.
So, John, were you as into it as we were?
Yeah, I'm sick of going third because you guys are stealing all the good stuff here. This is a perfect sketch. Perfect in its writing, perfect in its editing, perfect in its performances, perfect in its production values. I was floored with how competent everything in it was.
Mhm.
Catherine, you already touched on the writing. Sketch 101. If you're going to have a beat, don't let your next beat be less impactful than the previous one. Each one
Right.
has to, move the game forward a little bit and be a little bit
Mhm.
more insane, right? Like, you need to up the ante
Right.
each time.
Yeah, you can't
And that's
de-escalate.
exactly. That's exactly what this did. And it did it in subtle ways. Like, it didn't just go from 0 to 100, over 2 or 3 jokes. Each one was just so perfectly positioned in the back and
Mhm.
forth dialogue to just continue to ramp up the energy, just continue
Yeah.
to keep that heartbeat of the scene just pumping a little bit faster, a little bit faster. It just flawless, absolutely flawless. And like you said, Catherine, just the 1-2 punches of it all, where he's setting up a romantic cliche and then he's undercutting it by saying just a little too much. And the fact that she's even indulging this conversation at all, and he just keeps her on that string just enough to keep the door
Yeah.
open and just give me one more chance. So let me say one more thing. I know I can do this. Just let me, make one more point. And then, he blows it again. He blows it again. Great. You can tell immediately the movie trope that they're goofing on, and it's just it was flawless. I could go on, but there's really no point. I think we're all in agreement on this one.
Yeah.
2 enthusiastic
Yeah.
thumbs up.
All right. Well, a huge win on that one. Heading into the Foo Fighters performances, where they gave us Shame, Shame, and Times Like These. So, John, I'll let you go first, since although I know you're not going to have as much to say about this as a sketch, but how'd you like the Foo Fighters?
Oh, see, I didn't want to go first on this one. I thought you were going to throw to Steve for sure.
You get to go first on the
I
band.
wish I had something really smart to say, but I don't. I like the Foo Fighters. The Foo Fighters do what the Foo Fighters do, which is make a really big, thick, crunchy sound. And Dave Grohl's voice was on point, and there was absolutely nothing to not enjoy about these performances. I'm sure for people that are more worked up this week, that this felt very cathartic. Like, I think they were solid song choices for people just that wanted a release. So I think the Foo Fighters did everything that they were booked to do. And, there was a lot here to like. They were just solid jams, but I'm going to leave it at that because honestly, I don't have anything more profound to say. It was good music and I liked it.
All right. Well, I'm gonna give you a hot take then.
Okay.
That the first song, it was good. It was a jam. It was a little funky.
Mhm.
Of course, I love Times Like These. That's a great song.
Mhm.
But it felt a little bit like somebody forgot to tell Dave that the mood was celebratory. I was
Well,
feeling
yeah,
a
they
little
definitely took-
down with these songs.
Yeah, with times like these, they definitely played it very somber, until
Right.
they kicked it up there about
Until they
halfway
came
through.
in, yeah.
But you know what? Maybe that's just Dave Grohl's artistry. Like he's trying to take stock of the
Mhm.
last 4 years, and then we're just going to explode to life. I don't know. It could have just been
Right.
a creative choice. It's just such a catchy song that I can't fault it, even if they want to kind of mix up, how they're
Right.
going to present it. I don't know. It was working for me,
Yeah.
but like even though it wasn't the tone that you would have wanted, do you have anything bad to say about what they actually did, or you just feel like it was a mismatch for the show?
Right, yeah, the performances were not bad by any
Mhm.
means, and I like the Foo Fighters. I guess I was just wanting something a little more upbeat, so I was starting to feel the energy drain personally,
Okay.
and in the room I was in, which is not the studio, so what does it matter? But yeah, I just it was taking a little out of me, and I was like, oh, this wasn't really what I wanted to see from the Foo Fighters tonight.
I will say something on that point, and you
Mhm.
can probably attest to this as well. That studio was made for the musical performances. The way
Yeah.
you hear
Mhm.
them on TV, the mix is always a little muddy,
Right.
and the vocals are always a little too deep in the mix. Like there's it. I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It must be hard for them to figure out how to translate that for live TV on the
Mhm.
fly. So the mix is never that great going out on
Right.
broadcast, but in Studio 8H, that place just thumps with every kick drum
Right.
and just it just the whole room resonates and fills with sound. And even when the house band plays and you're like walking into the studio,
Mhm.
it just you
It's a
feel it in your
special feeling.
chest. It is. It's a
Yeah.
good feeling. And anyone that gets to go do the show, when they seat you and the band's playing, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna be like, yeah, that's what John was talking about. And so I'm sure that anyone who was listening to Foo Fighters in that small venue, it's been
Mhm.
probably 25 years since Foo Fighters ever played a room that small, other than SNL. So they were getting a
Right.
real treat to be 15 feet away from just this wall of sound. So I
Yeah.
bet it was
Right.
fun for them, if nothing else.
But
For sure.
yeah, for a stadium band like Foo
Mm.
Fighters, which is normally playing, much bigger venues, if you're going to pick a place as small as Studio 8H, you can't do better than Studio 8H for acoustics. All of the concrete they had to pour to isolate themselves from the running subway underneath at the time. This all contributed to some of the best sounding live music. And yeah, John's right. It doesn't really translate through the television broadcast airwaves or what have you. But yeah, it's probably one of the the ratio of, best sounding music to the amount of people that actually get to enjoy it in a live setting.
Right.
It's probably the biggest
Mhm.
Yeah.
injustice of the
Yes.
music industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think only one band has ever turned down the opportunity to play. I think it was Led Zeppelin said no to
I could see
playing on
that.
that stage because every band just wants to hear themselves play on that stage.
Sure.
But for the Foo Fighters themselves, times like these, it was an old favorite, but they
Mhm.
definitely did some rearrangement.
Mhm.
I don't know if I would have held off that long before coming in with the full band. It was an interesting take on the
Mm.
intro, but they kept it up for like 2 verses, which was quite a
See,
bit.
I like that.
Yeah,
It has me going like this, like, oh, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. They're gonna play their instrument soon. I don't know. I
Well,
like
see,
it when
like
it's,
I was sort of doing like it's gonna happen, and then when it didn't happen,
and then a
after
whole
the
nother
first
verse
I
goes
was
by.
like, oh, they're just gonna do this then.
Yeah.
I gave up hope too soon, I guess.
It's like having sex with Sting.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what a release.
Fair enough. All right, well, some mixed reviews on Foo Fighters.
Oh, I don't
Let's
know
get
if it's
into
super
weekend update.
mixed. Super
Yeah, true.
just,
We agree that the performances were good. That's true.
just
That's true.
unconventional and a little bizarre. We're not quite sure how they were supposed to fit into the show, if
True.
nothing else. Maybe that's yeah. All right. Sorry. Didn't mean to derail you there, Catherine.
No, you're good. Let's get into weekend update. Jost and Shay discuss Biden's victory and Trump's denial. Steve, how'd you feel about Weekend Update this week?
Yeah, a lot of gloveless shots here. That's where we're at currently. This had a special feel to it, this whole Weekend Update. I don't want to call it an end of an era because, we still got a couple of months left before any real changes happen, but we know the changes are coming. So there's some kind of catharsis there, especially with the reintroduction of Che's drinking. But I like that they did that because it kind of puts a positive spin on it. We've seen him pick up the cognac to talk about stuff that was stressing him out. Now it's more of a release. Like,
It's a celebratory drink.
it's a celebratory drink. So, he's drinking for good and bad reasons, at least we could say. But I've come to love what he can do with that glass. It does change everything. And with a guy like Trump, where a lot of the times you're just quoting what he's saying, and then, instead of a punchline, you're just taking a drink of your Hennessy. that is a well-constructed joke right there with, what you're given a lot of the time with a guy like Trump.
Yeah, I was happy to see Che's drinking habit come back. Which is a fun way to phrase that. Overall, I didn't feel like this Weekend Update lived up to the heights that I expected it to go. So we're at this point in the show, right, where I've enjoyed all the sketches so far. Haven't really had anything bad to say about them. But I'm sort of like, hold on. Wasn't there a huge breaking news story a few hours ago that I thought we would be talking about more? Because I'm not usually a person that lives and dies by like SNL's political comedy. I like it. It's good. But 9 times out of 10, I just want goofy sketches. This was the one night that I wanted 90 minutes of topical
Sure.
humor.
Yeah. If ever
so
there was
with
an opportunity. Yeah.
Right. So at this point in the show, I'm starting to say, what? What happened? I understand that the news just broke, but there was still a lot of topical stuff that we could have done.
Mhm.
There, a ballot counting sketch, a ballot counting Weekend Update character could have been a really fun thing to do that didn't rely on the news of the morning. And then Weekend Update was also only 10 minutes. And I'm like, of all the times to have a short update, this is the day that you picked. So this moment for me, while the jokes were good, I can't fault the joke writing. Like, it was a good update, but the feeling that I was having was starting to be like, this was the week, and you're not doing anything with it. I was starting to feel a little frustrated, honestly. So it took me out of it a bit to where I can't even really comment that much on the jokes. I was just starting to say, this is not what I expected, and really starting to feel that. So that's that. John, what did you think?
Um,
It pains me to say that.
yeah, I'm having trouble to wrapping my head around kind of how you got there, because I mean, Justin
Mhm.
Che's whole opening salvo was nothing but Trump / election
Right.
related topics. So it's not
Mhm.
like they didn't touch on it. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're just saying you wanted more like update features, like you wanted more room for them to have more like fun goofs on the
Right,
election.
it's not
hysteria?
even necessarily specifically update. It's like
Oh, okay.
we had 3 sketches before this that weren't
Sure.
topical. Well, I mean, I guess the Aunt Jemima
Okay.
one was topical, but not in that way. So I was just starting to
Alright.
think, oh,
So I
you
can wait. I
really
can-
wanted to play it safe this week.
Yeah,
And
well, it wasn't
not,
the getting the news the morning of the show is a double-edged
Mhm.
sword, right?
Right.
They probably had a lot of material that just wouldn't play because
True.
they probably assumed this was going to drag out a month. Like that's what a lot of the pundits were saying was,
Mhm.
don't expect an answer anytime soon. This is going to be a long slog. So I don't know if they were really anticipating how quickly they had to pivot on a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
So there's probably a lot of things they just had to, leave on the cutting room floor this week.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the stuff that they were preparing for, they probably consciously went with things that were a little more universal so that they would still have some material they could salvage
Right.
if something crazy happened. So
Mhm.
I think the fact that SNL's live and literally, you get a bomb like that dropped on the show, they got to do rewrites and they just got to make the most of it and
Mhm.
figure out how to repurpose sets and all the rest of it. So I know there was a lot of scrambling, and I think that we're just seeing the best thing you can do when you're putting on a live show the night of. So
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to cut them some serious slack on that.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that even though, we got like this bizarre little like rom-com parody, on a show that's on this historical turning point in US history. I understand where that could seem like maybe not this week SNL, but then again, I wouldn't want to lose something like that. So if they had something good like that, I'm
Right.
glad that they said, well, let's make sure we produce some stuff that is going to stick around no matter what happens
Sure,
this week.
yeah.
So I think that's probably where you're maybe getting a little hung up there, Catherine. For
Mhm.
what Weekend Update was, I think a lot of what they were doing was funny, and drunk Che revealing that he wears a clip-on, great. This is fun. They weren't doing anything wrong. But call me a softie, and I know that Trump is the grand arch villain of all time, but there's something that puts me off a little bit about kicking someone when they're down. Like, I know that SNL is very happy that Trump has ostensibly lost the election, and unless there's some serious gamesmanship in the courts, that's going to stick. But to take a victory lap that's kind of as scathing and biting as it was, it just doesn't feel very gracious, and maybe that's just my old timey values. But I almost feel like SNL had an opportunity here to sort of like be the bigger man in a way, like still make the jokes and have the fun. But it really, at a certain point, it just kind of felt like, let's just kick Trump until he's, mush. That's kind of how it
It's sort
felt
of
at a certain point
interesting
to
that,
me.
like, if he had like graciously conceded, then I don't know, I would
Well,
consider getting on board with that. But like,
sure, but
he was
Trump's gonna
also just
Trump.
being such a turd about it.
Yeah,
Like,
what
who
did Trump
cares?
give
Kick
them,
him.
really?
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the point about being the bigger person. The nice
Right.
thing about Trump is that all you have to do is look semi sane, and you come out, the bigger person in any situation. In
Right.
contrast, so I don't know, like SNL, it's a comedy show. They're going to find the jokes where they're going to find the jokes, but you could just see the writers' passions just pouring over. And at a certain point,
Mhm.
it just felt vicious. And I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that has any sympathy left for Trump, and I'm fine with that. Like, I understand, a lot of people are very happy this week, but like Chappelle said, half the country, they're in mourning right now, and it seemed a little bit much. That was my only thought on it. Solid jokes, good writing. They performed it well. It wasn't fumbly. Nothing bad to say about it. I'm just surprised
Right.
that it wasn't a little more playful, and it just felt at times a little bit really, really, yeah, punchy. So that's my only thought on it.
So,
As
yeah.
far as we're not going to get into our features yet, so I guess I'll just
Yeah.
throw back to you.
Two very opposite takes. I'm saying I want more, and you're saying please don't.
Kick him.
How typical.
Oh boy.
No. Let's get into that feature though, where Rudy Giuliani breaks down his election lawsuit strategies. Steve, did you enjoy this Giuliani appearance?
Oh yes, I was dying for something like this after the whole 4 seasons thing. And
Sure.
yeah, I mean, that is just that is a closer right there when it comes to political comedy. So for them to jump on that is no surprise to me.
Mhm.
And this is where Kate is, I think, the most creative and the most just like happy with herself to explore this creepy ass weirdo character that she's made up out of Giuliani. It looks like it hurts to play Giuliani. It looks like, like, have you ever tried to like make a chord on a guitar, but like a really long Dave Chappelle one?
Uh-huh.
Or Dave Chappelle, sorry. Really long Dave Matthews type chord. That's probably how her hands feel at the end of this. And like everything's stiff, her eyes are wide, she's not really focusing on anything. And there's a halfway mark where she like kind of like catches her breath. And I think that's actually a genuine like, whew, I'm tiring myself out playing Giuliani. Because yeah, there's such commitment and such creative juice that flows through Kate that I sometimes don't see, but I definitely see with Giuliani. So
Mhm.
it's a fun character to have visit.
Yeah. It's a very physical impression.
Oh yeah.
Almost solely physical impression, and it's good. I've enjoyed Kate's Giuliani. I thought this was a fun feature. They got on some of those day of jokes that I was craving, and I was having a good time with it. I really loved the bit about,
In Michigan, okay, we demanded a recount. In Wisconsin, we have demanded a decount. We called backsies in Nevada, we got safety in Arizona, and in Georgia, opposite day.
we're gonna recount and decount and backsies. I thought that was a really nice run, just really well written.
Safety.
Right. So yeah, I was having fun with this feature. John, what'd you think?
Kate does a good job with it. It's not my favorite character that she does, but if ever there was a week to dust it off, this is it, right? They certainly gave him something to talk about. You guys are all right about the physicality and the commitment to the character. Like, she's definitely in it. She got pummeled in the face with lettuce and she lost the character there for a minute. She goes back to Kate voice. So yeah, she had to steel herself and find the Giuliani voice because it's a very hard thing to have to maintain. That's got to hurt after a little while. So, props to Kate. Whenever Kate doubles down on a character, she can sell it. She's just that good. So nothing bad to say there. The jokes, it was all what you would expect on a news week like we've just had. These were the things that Giuliani would be talking about. So nothing bad to say about it.
Let's get into the back half of the show then. News 5 Albany covers the recent hailstorm that led two friends to kiss. Steve, what did you like what they did here?
Yeah, it was okay. This might have been around the time where I was feeling something like you were saying about the lack of topical stuff in a time where you would expect it. This was definitely veering away from that completely. But for the sketch itself, like if I were to just forget about what I was expecting the episode to be, this would be fun. The one thing that stood out was, no involvement from Dave Chappelle. And, when you're a modern day SNL watcher, you kind of expect the host to be in pretty much everything. And,
Right.
we've had a pre-tape without him. We've had this sketch without him. A lot of absence from the host, which is interesting to me, especially, a sketch legend like Dave Chappelle of all people. Like, I think Donald Trump showed up more in his own episode. But what I liked about this sketch is that you go from kind of rooting for these two and being on their side to eventually not so much because you learned some details along the way about, how
Your wife's missing?
His wife is missing. People have died. The more they reveal the context of what happened, the more you realize how inappropriate it was for them to be talking about this and only this. So yeah, it was a nice slow burn.
Yeah, I had a really good time with this one. I saw where it was going from a mile away, but I was still thrilled when it got there. And especially, I think it was made a little better by it being Kate and Keenan. They've been there for a long time, so it was sort of fun for that to be sort of the dynamic that we were playing with too. And this was good stuff. I think it's interesting placement in the show. This feels like post monologue sketch to me. So, it's a little late for what it is. And I think I would feel super warm on this any other week. But like I just said, Weekend Update sort of got me in this like, wait a second, what about Nevada? There were no jokes about Nevada ballot counters, So I had that going for me, but if I take it out, like Steve said, of the context of what I was expecting, this is a really solid sketch that I really enjoyed and had a great time with. So, John, what did you think?
I'm pretty sure Chappelle strolled into 30 Rock sometime late Thursday. So
I've heard people say that on the internet, but I'm pretty sure he was there Wednesday based on...
Was he there Wednesday?
They posted the table read picture Wednesday.
Did they? Okay, so he was there Wednesday.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's still later than they have been doing.
Yeah,
it.
well, especially because they're trying to give themselves a buffer day because of production constraints. So Wednesday or Thursday, whatever it was.
Either way, yeah.
Yeah, it does seemed to indicate that they were producing material assuming that they might not have him on hand for pre-tapes on Friday, or just it seems like maybe he was moving at his own speed, or he came with a couple requirements about how much time he was going to put in throughout the week. Who knows how that played out or why, but yeah, it is obvious that he wasn't ever present on this episode.
Right.
But the nice thing is it gave them the breathing room to pull in some of this evergreen content, stuff that you could play any week, that they've, maybe they started producing this on a different week and it just never, got where it needed to get to be on air. So they're pulling in stuff to round out a week where maybe they had to scrap so much material or just couldn't rely on having much material that they went with some of these, just more generic, premises that don't require any particular show to be situated into. So however it came about, I'm glad it did, because this was great. This was another really, really solid sketch, just in how it unfolded, how satisfying each reveal was, how much you root for these simple, dumb characters, even though it turns out Keenan is the worst kind of villain, just completely unfazed by the idea that his, wife is missing under a pile of hail somewhere. Yeah, something a little dark about where they went with it, but that was half the fun.
Well, let's keep going into our second local news parody, where DC Morning breaks the news of Trump fleeing the city OJ style. Steve, was this a win for you?
I mean, yeah, it was enjoyable. The comparison made there was hard to overlook, and it's not the most astute, biggest head scratcher of a connection to make, but it does work for some comedic purposes. What I notice is that this could have gone either way. Like, this is a sketch that they could have made work whether or not Trump won or whether he lost, because all you have to do is kind of change the context of why he's in the Ford Bronco. Was he, is he fleeing because he lost, or is he fleeing because he won? And, the joke is that
he had those fences up because people were going to attack the White House or whatever.
He's being run out on a rail. There's a mob after him or something.
Yeah. It could win. It could work either way, knowing like the core audience and the sensibilities of the audience of SNL.
Yeah, this is fun. It's nice to see Dave pop in again. Nice of him to join us. So this is a fun joke. There's not a ton of places to go with it, so I thought they did a decent job of stretching it out. Though I don't feel like they had to stretch it out. I know that SNL doesn't really do them, but I would have been okay with this more or less being a blackout. This is a 2-page sketch. I'm okay with it. We don't have to make it longer than that. And I do think they embrace that a little bit. This is not very long by any means. And so, yeah, this is a fun sketch. What's also interesting is that we had 2 local news parodies back to back.
Right.
When there's really no reason either of them couldn't have been swapped to the other side of the show. There's, to me, at least, there's no reason why Mario couldn't have been in the back half and, one of these in the front half. It leads me to believe, because, Lorne Michaels knows what he's doing. He creates a rundown. So there has to be that they cut something in between these two that would have spaced it out a little better. But it was certainly a little jarring to come back from a commercial break and be like, wait a second, are we still in the last one, or is this a new news? So that was just sort of a fun, a little bit meta thing to take on it. As far as the sketch itself, this was good enough. John, how'd you feel?
Well, I feel bad for the writer who, coming out of update, someone walks up to him and says, "Oh, by the way, you got to carve 2 minutes out of your Bronco sketch." I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. Yeah, obviously they wouldn't have produced it for the 1 minute that made it onto air. So yeah, there was definitely something getting trimmed down and something's lost in translation, because there must have been more to this sketch than what we got. And that happens. To answer your question, Catherine, there's some hard commercial breaks, and they already pushed one back for Chappelle's monologue. So that was one of the latest first commercial breaks in the show that they've had. So I have a feeling the show clock they were under the gun probably from there on out. And
Right.
that's probably why we only saw one feature on Update. I know there was a pre-tape that was being produced that never made it to air. So yeah, there was something funny happening with the show clock. And I think that that's something that they're just figuring out as the live show begins. And they're just, they're just recalculating on the fly and figuring out what'll fit. But the reason why these two ostensibly news program pieces got put back to back, I think the timing just forced their hand like that. This was the only block of time they had. These are the only two pieces that'll fit. Let's carve them in out of that one. We'll make it work. And I think that's what we saw here. So that's my conspiracy theory. And
it's definitely a sport to fitting all these things in. And
So
putting the puzzle together for sure.
Yeah, we shouldn't be too cavalier about assuming that the show always has control over what ends up at the top and what ends up at the bottom, because sometimes they just have to make the math work. It's not.
To be clear, I'm aware I don't know anything, and I respect everything you've ever done. So,
all right, Descartes.
But as far as what ends up on the screen, this was probably the weakest of the night, just because whatever ended up on the screen, there wasn't much to it. So, it's a shame we didn't go out on something a little stronger, but we got so much good live sketch fare tonight that I'm not sweating it. We got some really great material. So, yeah, it is what it is. This is how we went out tonight.
All right. Well, that's the end of the rundown. So let's get into our ratings. Up first, moment of the night. Steve, I'll let you go first again.
This one was difficult to choose because there were so many good potential moments to make moment of the night. I was dancing around with the idea of Chappelle doing the Charleston and then just dying at himself doing such hilarious white person dancing. I would say, though, I lean towards my alternate choice, which was a line from the first sketch after the monologue between Dave Chappelle and Pete Davidson.
Some Italian, then we'll put you on some spaghetti, you chocolate bitch.
There's nothing that brilliant about it, but with Dave's delivery, I was just about, beat faced and ready to collapse.
Fair enough. That's a very good line. Rivaled in that sketch maybe only by look at Pete Davidson's lips, which is certainly a contender for my moment of the night. But I'm going to go, and John's not going to like this, with the loser moment. Just because, it was, as much as I've complained about Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey instead of Biden, it's the moment that will allow it, right? And it was, I was in a room that was very festive and we were feeling really good. So it was nice to just have that moment, take that victory lap. And, I was really feeling it. So I'm going to give it to Jim there. John, what was your moment?
Alec Baldwin sits down at the piano and delivers the most heartfelt rendition of Macho Man. That to me is really fun political satire. They've invested 4 years in Alec's version of Trump. We know all the Trump beats. We know who he is. We know how SNL approaches Trump. And we know that we've seen him at a piano making fun of the previous election. So to bring it full circle and then to tie in something that is really hilarious, to see this 70-something, orange man at his rallies, doing Village People, which just seems to betray the whole Republican thing. There's just so much that's immediately funny about that collision that then for them to take it, flip it on its head, and for that to be his swan song, that's inspired. There's something really nice about that. And as he's sitting down, and as soon as I clued in that, it's Macho Man, click, it all makes sense. SNL, this is the kind of stuff that I like to see from your political caricatures. And I thought Alec Baldwin really did a good job with that. There's ways to make that cornier and more tongue in cheek and just not walk a line that would have been as satisfying. But the way he did it was just pitch perfect for the occasion. And I really, really, really thought that was a fun moment.
Very good. Let's get into our best sketch then, Steve.
Best sketch. I think Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben should get it. There was just so much I loved about it. We've already talked about the Pete Davidson and Dave Chappelle interaction and all the brilliance that came from that. But aside from that, we got, some pretty hilarious stuff from Aunt Jemima herself. Keenan, I could watch a whole sketch of him just naming types of rice.
Right? Like, how is that so good?
Yeah. Like that could have been like an extra couple of minutes and I would have eaten it all up, Yeah, I think that's the right choice to make.
It's not subjective at all. Steve has laid it down.
That's the right choice.
Yep.
I toyed a little bit with giving it to the cold open because, like I've said, that was the content I was craving. But I don't think that's fair because the episode lives on past this week, and it wasn't the strongest best sketch of the night. The best sketch of the night, with all due respect to Steve Finn, was "Take Me Back," the pre-tape with Keith.
That is the right answer, by the way.
I
so
raved
Steve,
on
that's
about how
the correct answer.
Okay.
about how well written it was, and
I must have an
it
older
blew me
edition of
away.
the textbook then.
Yeah, you need to update that. Yeah, so I'm giving it to Take Me Back. That's that, and I assume John is on board with that.
Yeah, that has some of the most brilliantly written dialogue we've seen on SNL in a while. The craftsmanship astounded me with that one.
I wish I knew who wrote it, but I haven't seen anything yet. So
yes, we normally do our homework, not this week. We're all, I think, a little hungover. We said so much about it. I don't want to, go down that same road, but it just when it ended, and they even had a fun little button, right? Like where you realize that, this shtick that he does, it's actually enough to win her back. Like this has worked for him before. And she actually is like, oh, he does love me.
And also it was a lie. He still had all his drugs on him.
Right. Yes. Yes. So it's just right up to the very last scene, he keeps undercutting himself. And there's just more layers to this onion of depravity, that he's revealing to her. So it was truly brilliant. And I think it'll go past a lot of people. Like they'll see something like this and they'll be like, yeah, that was fun. But I don't think they realize how hard it is to craft dialogue that sits with itself so cohesively. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing to see. And I love when SNL delivers a home run like that.
Definitely. All right. MVP is up next. Steve, who's it going to?
Ooh, that is so tough because, you want to give it to Dave Chappelle for the great monologue, but then you wonder, is it the right thing to do when there's so many sketches that he just didn't show up in? But you know what? When we give it to a cast member or a musical guest, which has happened before, we don't necessarily expect them to be in every single sketch. We just agree that they had a couple of great moments and that puts them above everyone else. So even with the lack of presence that Dave Chappelle could, be criticized for, he still provided that amazing monologue and, did so much heavy lifting just with that one aspect of the show.
Very good.
Yeah. I
was a little torn between Maya and Ego. I think they both had really strong showings. Maya is Kamala, nailed it, got that victory moment in the cold open, and then came back with a brilliant Aunt Jemima and really fun stuff. And then Ego, double newscaster duty, doing great stuff too. So I think I'm ultimately going to favor the cast member relatively early in her tenure. That it's really cool to see them trust Ego. A lot of people could have been in that pre-tape. It didn't need to be Ego, but they gave it to Ego and she did a hell of a job with it. And then really owns those newscaster roles. Even going back to the race wars one last season. She really shines in those moments. So yeah, I'm going to give it to Ego. I think she had a really strong night. John?
Yeah, Ego is not fumbly. She can get solid lines of dialogue out very competently.
Mhm.
So seeing her and Alex together, like two very capable, like linguistic performers, like just really being able to make love to those cue cards. That's always fun to see. And newscaster roles are fun for that. Well, because there's a certain cadence to the newscaster, and you kind of
Right.
have there's a certain energy you got to bring to how you deliver dialogue in those roles. And yeah, so it is. You're not wrong that Ego's been doing a lot of good work, and she popped up a lot tonight. So that's all good. I wish I had a better answer than Keenan. I think he was just doing yeoman's work tonight. He was in a lot of sketches, and he was giving me a lot of laughs just because I always find his characters so satisfying. You know, he was one of the primary reactions in the Mario sketch. He was Uncle Ben. He was one of the Hailstorm star-crossed lovers. You know, when Keenan pops up, I don't know. I always giggle. And so I was just happy to see him doing some fun stuff tonight. As much as I wanted to give it to Dave Chappelle, because, you know, Dave Chappelle puts his stamp on a show, it is interesting that there wasn't more of Chappelle infused in so much of the show. And so because of that, I think I'll step back and say I think Keenan was doing some good work this week.
Keenan was complaining about the order he was going into, so I could see how you relate to that.
There you go. Yeah.
Fair enough. Keenan's always a good choice.
Mhm.
On a scale of classic, great, decent, weak, or train wreck, Steve, how would you rate this episode?
That's a toughie. You know, you come in with expectations, especially like 4 hours before air when you realize, you know, they actually called the election. You want to expect really big things. You know, you try to manage those expectations because you realize, okay, COVID, 7 shows in a row, yada yada yada. You know, it's not the best equation for like a pull out all the stops amazing show. But you know, we have Dave Chappelle there, and you know, a lot of the writing, it felt like Tonight Show on a Friday. You know, when they record the Friday show on a Thursday, so they try to keep the news out of it.
Mhm.
You know, because you know they're not going to know what happens the next day. That's how they approach this show, and I don't fault them for it, but it makes it feel, you know, once you get past the second half of the show, just like any other show, really. So as much as I loved the monologue, the cold open, that first sketch, uh, you know, the back half to me wasn't quite up there with the rest of it. So it's still a decent from me. I'll give it a decent for sure.
This one is really tough for me to rate, like because all of the things that Steve just said. It's the moment of time that we're in and how I felt with my expectations going in that brought me down a little bit. But if I'm just looking at the content, everything here was great. You know, it was with the exception of the DC morning one, which, you know, they had to chop down a lot, there was nothing that I didn't like. So it's difficult for me to decide, well, is it great because the content was great, or is it decent because it didn't feel like it lived up to the cycle of the news that we were in? But I think it's only fair to give it a great because I can't fault them. I don't know what happened. You know, the news was breaking. There was a lot going on. It was an insane week. And it's their 6th week in a row, and they delivered us really solid sketch comedy. So whether or not it was what I wanted, they don't care. This was good material, and, you know, I think this was a great episode. So when you can replay it out of this moment of time we're in, and things are gonna hold up, and none of this material was really missing, you know, I think that's a great episode. John, what do you think?
Well, this week I am going to defer to my sister Amy, who sends me her hot take text after every SNL, and I always disregard them religiously. But this
Oh,
week
nice of you.
I think she's on point. So she says, "Classic episode. No way it wasn't. Even the weakest sketch, the Bronco chase, was still solid. The monologue was real. The mood was hopeful and joyful. I laughed and laughed and laughed the entire episode. So that's
You're doing a phone a friend.
yeah, that was my sister's hot take, and I don't think she's far off. I think this is a classic. I think sometimes the situation that the show lands in forces it to be something other than a typical outing of SNL. And I think we were seeing that this week. You can't disregard that Chappelle gave a record-breaking monologue in a few respects, and he's still on top of his game, and he is the sort of voice that can carry the weight of a monologue on this sort of a show. So he was the right booking. It was the first time that I felt like their political cold opens this season was really, really strong. And more often than not, I thought they were hitting with their political commentary than missing. So for all those reasons, and just the fact that it is basically the first pop culture comment on the election results, that's transcendent. That is something beyond ordinary. And then the icing on the cake is they dropped in a couple real gems that you just aren't expecting. We've had, very middle of the road, hit or miss live sketch fair so far this season, which is typical for SNL. They can't all be great, but this was all pretty great. So we had some great live sketch stuff. We had a great pre-tape. And on top of it, you had, just one of those hosts that you can never fault. And it was a momentous week. So if ever there was a classic, I think there's got to be a classic in there somewhere.
Wow. Well, we really ran the gamut on that rating.
What a spectrum.
Yeah. But none of us, they were all positive reviews. So good job, guys. Enjoy your rest.
Yes. Sleep it off. You've earned it. 6 episodes in a row. You earn that mug. Yeah. Go home.
Yeah.
Sleep it off. We'll see you when we see you.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks to Steve, Finn, and John Murray. And thanks as well to our most generous patrons, Sam Bowers, Neil Weinstein, Justin Gardner, Carissa Eubank, and Brian Clark. If you're enjoying our show, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever better podcasts can be found. Your subscription helps us grow, and your support is greatly appreciated. We'll be back soon whenever SNL's had enough time to sleep it off. But until then, this has been episode number 121 of the Saturday Night Live Afterparty podcast. I'm Catherine Coleman. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.